Hello and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, my co-host Justin Baker, joining me as we do a deep dive into the top 4 teams of the Central Division. If you missed the show last week, you missed us deep diving the Vegas Golden Knights, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Oh, geez, who else did we do? We did the Edmonton Oilers and the Boston Bruins. That's right. So those 4 teams, go check out that deep dive. And as we jump into these 4 top teams of the Central Division, we've got a good race on our hands. And on top of that, 4 teams that might add players at the deadline. So it should be fun. Justin, hi. Welcome to Snowpocalypse Part 2.
Yeah, this one, it's funny. For those who don't know, we had a major snowstorm. Maybe, I don't even know. It was probably a couple weeks ago. We were supposed to get like 15 inches. We only got like 3.
Oh, you only got 3? See, I got 12 or 13.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, we might. I mean, honestly, I think we got like about 6 inches.
I also, I live an hour north of you, so that's
true.
It's basically a different. Once you get north of 59, if you know anything about Detroit, once you get north of 59, it like the weather pattern changes. I mean, when I go down, 59's like 8 minutes from my house, just south, and I'll go down to 59, and there'll be barely any snow, and then come up, and there's 3 inches. It's just there's a big variance for whatever reason. I don't know if White Lake has anything to do with it. I don't think that White Lake is big enough to produce like snow effect or anything like that, but there are a lot of lakes right by us, and I don't know if that does anything, but or we just kind of get more of the like Grand Blanc kind of weather as opposed to Detroit. So
right.
But anyways, you made it after an hour and a half drive home from work. Good job.
Yeah, great. 3 times my normal commute. It's fantastic.
Gosh. Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah. They said that we were supposed to get like all this ice and freezing rain, and it was supposed to last until the morning. And then, of course, today when I showed up to work, they said, "Oh, it's only supposed to last till like 10 o'clock," which is, better, but still,
yeah, it's better for me because I got to drive to Florida tomorrow. So
I know.
But I
feel so sorry for you, but
it'll be fine. By the time I'm on the road, the highways are usually pretty decent, especially 12 hours after the main snowfalls happen. It's all fine.
Oh, they already had salt trucks out there the minute I was on my commute home. So
and the other ones, when we're in a snowstorm in February, there's already like a blanket of salt out there. So that helps. The first big snowfall before they get out there, it can get a little slick because there's no base. And speaking of bases, I don't know how to transition. I thought I might have something.
I was hoping for a good one.
But the Colorado Avalanche are sitting pretty. They finally lost in regulation the other night to Dallas, but I mean they lost to Dallas, except for they had 47 shots on goal. And like an expected goals of like 4.7 or something. Like just, they had they should have won and they lost 4-1. That's how good this team is. Even on nights where they every team gets unlucky sometimes. A team steals a game. Kudos to Jake Ottinger for ending that streak for the Dallas Stars. But the Colorado Avalanche, since losing to the Toronto Maple Leafs, have on December 2nd, they lost 8-3. And since losing before that Dallas game, they had only lost twice in regulation since December 2nd.
Wow.
So this team is on a freaking roll. They've outscored their opponents like 115-70 in those couple months. They're on an absolute tear. They are, I think, in terms of a regular season success, they're definitely the number 1 team in the National Hockey League. 70 points through 45 games. There's only the Florida Panthers have 69, but they've played 2 more games. They're really the only team that's pretty close. Tampa's 68 and 48 games. So, Colorado's just been cleaning up. By the time they play their 49th game, it's likely they'll have like 78 points. So, I mean, I look at this team, they don't have a whole lot of cap space. They could probably finagle a little bit. We know they're in the conversation for Claude Giroux, but realistically, what can this team do beyond what they're already doing right now?
Right. See, that's the question too. And the other one you have to ask yourself on top of that is, do you want to mess with this team already, right? They've got these lines that are rolling very good. Everybody seems to be playing great hockey up and down that lineup. So do you want to try to upset that chemistry and try to mix things up a little bit, right? You bring in a guy like Giroux, obviously you've got to stick him on your top six somewhere, which, again, I look at Colorado and, okay, great. He would probably look really good alongside Kadri, or maybe you move Landeskog down with Kadri, and now you can, shift Giroux up there. But still, I mean, I don't know if, again, the price you're going to have to pay to get a guy like Giroux, who can take faceoffs, play on the wing. He's very versatile everywhere at both ends of the ice, and then let alone his cap hit. Is it even worth giving up the assets and trying to bring in a guy like that when you could probably go out and get some cheaper options to fill in maybe your bottom six, your back end a little bit more? I don't know. I think for me, if I'm looking at this Colorado team, I think they need probably a couple things. Now, a few weeks ago, I probably would have said they need a backup goaltender. Maybe they could have targeted Marc-Andre Fleury,
or just a goaltender.
Right. Right, a healthy goaltender.
But Darcy Kemper he's only gone and he has not lost in regulation since November 26th funny enough, against Dallas. But yeah, I mean, that's an 19 game stretch where he's lost in OT once and he lost in a shootout once.
Right. He's looked really good. The last, month and a half, he's basically squashed all concerns about, is he going to be the starter, the guy for this team down the stretch? And of course he is.
He's also got a 2-game shutout streak going.
Right. Yeah. Looked really good last night against Vegas. I was watching that one, especially just because of Jack Eichel.
Sure.
Was a great game. Now, again, besides the goaltending thing, that aside, really the only other thing I could say that could really help this team would be some size on the back end. To me, I think that's maybe the one area where I look at this team and say, okay, if they want to upgrade, and they can probably upgrade pretty cheaply, would be to get some size on the back end. Now, you could go after a more expensive trade asset like Ben Sherratt. I think, there's probably 25 teams that are in the mix for a playoff spot that would love to have this guy on their roster. But for me, I'm looking at another guy that maybe not a lot of people are talking about, but I think as we get closer to the deadline, you're going to see his name pop up more and more, and that's Calvin DeHaan from the Chicago Blackhawks.
That's a good name.
I think that's a guy that, yeah, it's a very good name. Yeah, I think that's a guy because eventually we're going to see Chicago start their fire sale, and it might start with Marc-Andre Fleury, but at $4.5 million, I think there's still some wiggle room there for the Avs to fit him in there. He's a guy that brings a lot of size on the back end. He's shown that he's capable of playing some good defensive minutes, and I think you can throw him in there on your third pair and really get some valuable minutes out of him, and he wouldn't be a liability to you at all either.
Yeah, one other name to throw out there too, Colin Miller on the Buffalo Sabres. It does have a heftier contract at $3.8 million, but there's ways to finagle that. Buffalo could eat half. You could get someone else to eat half, and suddenly he's at $800,000. But he would be a guy who, seemingly would probably fit as that role that you're talking. Somebody who can come in and be that stay-at-home presence to kind of offset what else you have, which is a ton of offensive ability from the back end. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. The one issue for the Avs,
right? Only
a third, 5th, 6th, and 7th round pick for this next draft. So that would be, that's somewhat of a concern because, you don't have a first round pick this year to deal. One of those picks was for Darcy Kemper, right? And that second round pick, I think, was, what was that? Devin Taves. So,
yep.
Yeah, in some respects, in my opinion, if Colorado did almost nothing, besides the move where you can bring in the players who are like league minimum type of guys, and you just you're essentially just kind of getting guys just in case injuries happen and you need to throw guys in. Outside of those types of moves, I just don't see where Colorado needs to do anything huge. Now, if they can get Claude Giroux in there, I feel like the only way that's going to happen is if like a Nichushkin is on his way out. Like there's going to have to be somebody who's on the roster who is no longer there, who's actually making some money. I don't really, which I mean, you don't really want to trade Nichushkin. He's got 25 points in 32 games. And, I mean, I guess who's your other? I mean, everyone's just clicking. Like, everyone who's making money who might be a UFA, like Burakovsky, you're not trading him. He's got 36 points. There's just not a lot of options unless, you're willing to part with a player who's under contract beyond this year, which maybe a JT Compher, if you wanted to move out someone, like he would make sense from Philadelphia's standpoint. Like he's somebody who could come in and play center and you could move him up and down your lineup, and he would kind of, he gives you a body to go in and play. He's got another year left on his contract, which in some respects helps Colorado next off season. They wouldn't have that sitting there. So, I mean, his 3.5, Giroux cut in half, and I think you'd be there. So maybe Compher somebody. I mean, he's not really producing, especially in comparison to his peers on the rest of the team, only 16 points in 36 games. I mean, still a guy who's still on pace for over 30 points. It's not like he's a bad player. And maybe given more ice, he could put up 45 points probably in a year. But I mean, other than that, does Colorado go get a goalie? I mean, is there a world in which we see them dealing Francouz and bringing in some other goaltender?
No, I don't think there's any reason to go outside of those two guys they have. I mean, Kemper and Francouz have been pretty good this last month and a half, and so there's really no reason or no question about their ability to be a good duo down the stretch. Now, maybe again, a lot of teams I've seen do this in the past over the last couple of years, and we've seen it more and more, the importance of it down the stretch, and you might want to go and get yourself a decent third string goaltender. For example, like in Chicago, right? Or in St. Louis, they've got Binghamton and Husso, but they've also got Charlie Lindgren back there, who's been pretty good when called upon. And so again, if Kemper, who's been known to be injured in the past, same with Francouz, if you get one or two of these guys go down, you want to make sure you have a decent third goaltender back there to be able to fill in some tough minutes down the stretch. And so if that was maybe the one thing I would look at, maybe you could go get yourself a
third string guy.
Yeah, I don't even know who at this point you could really go look at. But, regardless, maybe you call Devin Dubnyk up and you say, hey, you want to come back to Colorado? But
there you go.
Other than that, I mean, again, you could probably find something for a 6th or 7th round pick. A team really just, looking to offload a contract or something like that. So.
Sure. Okay. If the Colorado Avalanche lose, if they do not win the cup, what is it that's going to stop them from winning the cup?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, again, I look at this team and I say, okay, again, a lot of people are going to consider them the favorites to win the cup, but for me, I want to see them at least go a couple rounds, make some improvements, maybe get to the conference final. That would be a win in my book for this team, especially because, McKinnon, Rantanen, they're still young guys, relatively speaking, but they're right in their prime. So you want to see them take that next step. Now, if they don't win the cup, right, the one thing, like you mentioned, that's going to keep them from winning the cup, in my opinion, is going to be playing with a little bit of grit, right? When they get into those nitty-gritty games where they're having to grind it out. Now, last night against Vegas was a really good example of that because, they had to grind it out a little bit. They really couldn't utilize their speed as much as maybe they typically would against some other teams. Now, again, Landeskog obviously is going to bring some grit. Kadri will bring a little bit of that as well. And you hope that maybe some other guys down the lineup can do that as well. But, like I said, on the back end, that's maybe the one thing they're missing. So I think, assuming that everybody's healthy everybody plays a decent game, especially Darcy Kemper and net, I think that's the one thing that could really hurt them when they have to grind out those tight 1-0, 2-1 games, for 6-7 games in a playoff series.
In fairness, the game that you're referring to, they won. They won 2-0. So they were able to grind it out with them, right? Like it's not as if they.
And that's a. Yeah, but I just think that if it gets down to it, that might be the one thing that would hurt them, because again they like to utilize their speed. They like to play fast and up tempo game, and
absolutely. So somebody can slow them down and get them playing a game that isn't speed based, talent based. If they're in a grind, which there's a couple teams in this division that could bring that type of game. I mean, Minnesota, they play pretty stinking heavy. They've got some monsters on that team. St. Louis, we all know that they've got guys who can play that heavy brand of hockey. The Nashville Predators too can lean on you a bit. So I mean, this division is not without its teams that could potentially play spoiler to the Avalanche. I mean, right now, if the playoffs were to start today, I believe it would be Nashville is who they would play. So, yeah, I think it's Nashville because they always
Now, personally, Nashville would be a great series for sure, because I'm excited to see what this revamped John Hines team can do. Now, honestly, if I had to pick one thing that I think is really going to stop them, because I do think after watching last night's game against Vegas, I think they are going to be capable of playing that grind out type of playoff hockey, but I think they're going to run into a hot goaltender, right? I think that's the one thing that could just pretty much kill them as far as.
And I guess that's that's any team, right? Like, hey,
right, exactly.
That's
how good this Colorado team is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, any goalie gets stupid hot, like a Halak against the Capitals, or a Jaguar or something like that. Like, all bets are off. But that does not happen nearly as often as I think. Maybe like the lore of that idea when it actually happened. Like, more often than not, the team that is far superior wins. That's generally what happens. I mean, we don't often see the 8th seed sweep the Stanley Cup favorite like we did when the Tampa Bay Lightning tied the record for most wins in a season and then dumped the bed in 4 games. That was like, those things, they're unbelievable because they just don't happen very often. But
exactly.
Hockey's a crazy sport. Well, with that said, let's move on to the Minnesota Wild, because they're probably I'd say out of these 4 teams, this is the team that 18 months ago, talking about the Minnesota Wild, we didn't have them in this type of position. Nobody thought they were this good. I mean, everyone figured that Kirill Kaprizov would be good, but we didn't think that he would be a superstar. And that's, it's because a lot of players that come from the KHL, they're touted highly, and they end up being like 4th line, score 10 goals, and they don't end up being all that we are being touted. But Kirill Kaprizov is one of those guys that just has exceeded all expectations. He's been unbelievable, and it has been, I mean, it's just been a really good season for this team. They're getting good goaltending from both Kakkonen and Talbot. Their defense is the way that they play, very stifling, and they play a good team defensive game. What do you think Bill Guerin's going to do leading up to the trade deadline? Because he actually has almost $10 million in cap space for the deadline.
Yeah, he's got a good number of dollars to spend now. I mean, honestly, there's only one thing I think that this team needs, and that's a center, a top 6 center for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong, Hartman's been doing a great job playing on that top line, but when it gets down to it, when you get to the playoffs, right, those teams that don't have dynamic centers don't succeed. I mean, we've watched it with, Washington, St. Louis, Tampa. They've all had really quality centers down the middle, And when I look at this team right now, your highest paid center is Joel Eriksson Ek, who's playing third line minutes right now. And then behind him, you've got Ryan Hartman. Again, you've got to fix this. This has been the one problem with Minnesota all year long, in my opinion. And I think they need to try to remedy this sooner rather than later, because I think, again, for example, one guy that, has been already linked to Minnesota has been Claude Giroux. Obviously he controls his own fate,
sure,
where he goes. And I mean, it's already been rumored that he wants to go to one of these top three teams here in the Central. So, any one of these three teams would definitely benefit from him, but I think none more than the Minnesota Wild, just because of their lack at the center position.
Yeah, but is he even a center anymore? Is he going to go? Would he go into Minnesota and play center? I don't know that he would.
Yeah, I think he could slide in, no problem. He's still one of the best.
I guess in
guys
comparison.
In the NHL.
Yeah, I guess in comparison. I mean, now Frederick Gaudreau. I mean, the issue at center ice is that they don't have any names, right? But Ryan Hartman's played really well. Frederick Gaudreau has played very well, especially alongside Kevin Fiala, Matthew Boldy. I mean, these guys are producing much better than I think we thought they would, but their chemistry, the way that Dean Evason has coached this team and has constructed the lineup is that, hey, Kaprizov's going to be up front, and go ahead, put whoever you want with him. He's going to make guys around him better. Same with Kevin Fiala. Fiala has made Boldy and Gaudreau better. Joel Eriksson Ek with Jordan Greenway and Marcus Foligno. I mean, that's a heavy big line to play against.
Yes, I love that third line for sure. But when you talk about guys like Hartman and who else they have down the center, I almost compare them to Chandler Stevenson in Vegas, right? I mean, he was playing great alongside Stone and Pacioretty because, again, he had quality wingers.
Sure,
so, of course, he's going to succeed. And so I kind of look at that the same way. But, again, if you can get obviously they're not going to go find themselves a Jack Eichel, but if you can get a quality center, that only makes them that much better, in my opinion. And I think they're just going to be tougher to play against. And, another name I'm going to throw out there, too, who I think would be a perfect fit, but I think they're going to have a harder time reeling out of his current team because they're still in contention for a playoff spot, and that's Joe Pavelski. I can't think of a guy that wouldn't fit better in this Minnesota team up at that top line, the way he likes to grind out. He's a fantastic faceoff guy, but, again, Dallas is right in the thick of things. They're in the bubble. They're only a few points. I mean, I think they were 6 or 8 points behind Nashville, and they 2 games at hand. So, again, they're right in the thick of it. But, again, I think it's going to come down to the wire with Dallas before they start to sell off their assets. So that's why he might be a little bit harder to get. But I think Pavelski would be the perfect fit in Minnesota.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and one other, just almost an aside for the Wild, Nick Bjugstad is actually ready to return. He broke his finger, right? And he hasn't been playing. So that's a big help. I mean, Bjugstad isn't going to put you up big points, but he's certainly somebody who, he's responsible. He can play in your third and fourth line. Can chip in the odd goal. So Bjugstad is healthy and ready to go here pretty soon. So that at least that's depth in the postseason is huge, and we're talking about a position of weakness. So if you don't have the superstar at that position, you better have lots of depth so you can keep plugging and playing.
Sure.
So with his return, that's beneficial. I would say I guess if there's one player that the Wild could deal and maybe if they really wanted to do something crazy with Claude Giroux and they don't need to retain salary, like if that were a possibility and Victor Rask went the other way, and then Victor Rask gets flipped for something else by the Flyers, something like that, where, I mean, it's not going to be just Victor Rask. But Victor Rask is not having a terrible season. 13 points in 29 games, but I think that it could be beneficial for everybody to cut bait there because he hasn't been that great during his time in Minnesota, and he's making $4 million. He's a free agent at the end of this year. He's not going to be re-signed. So maybe it's, if they can, instead of having salary retained, could include Rask there, and then the Flyers can retain $2 million on Rask, and suddenly he's an asset. Flip him for a third round pick, and a team is going to jump at Rask, who maybe is a third line center for somebody. Minnesota could do a ton here. They could also bring in a defenseman as well. Ben Sherratt. You talk about a guy who would fit somewhere really well. Yes, their back end is pretty loaded, but sometimes it's these teams with a position of strength, and they just go out and bolster it even more. And I could see it happening. I could see Minnesota being in on Ben Sherratt too, because one of these guys go down for Minnesota, and suddenly you've got an issue. So if you've got that backup, you've got Ben Sherratt in the playoffs, you just know someone's going down, and you wouldn't have that as a concern.
Yeah, I will say defensive depth never hurts at all. Obviously their top four is pretty solidified with Goligoski, Dumba, Brodin, and Spurgeon. But again, like you mentioned, having that depth on D is not going to hurt you at all, especially if one of those guys go down. Right.
Anything with goaltending? Are you concerned? Do you think that they'll go out and try to snag Marc-Andre Fleury or something?
No. I feel comfortable with this goaltending squad, just like I did with Colorado. I'm okay with it. Now, if they want to go out and maybe try to get themselves a third stringer, but they've got Zane McIntyre, Hunter Jones that they can always call up. But again,
does acquiring Marc-Andre Fleury make this turn this team into legitimate Stanley Cup contenders? Would he make that much of a difference?
No, I don't think he's going to elevate this team that much more. For example, like a Washington, right, who really lacks a quality number one, just true number one, right? He would probably put them over to that next level. Minnesota, not so much. Yes, I do think when it comes down to a playoff series, if I had to choose between Talbot and Fleury, of course I'm going to take Fleury, but is he that much better? No. And the assets you're going to have to give up and, try to squeeze it. Again, they've got the cap room, but the assets
they have the cap room,
to get a guy like Fleury, I don't think it's worth it in my mind. I'd rather spend those assets somewhere else to try to find myself a center.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. The center position has got to be. If they could get Giroux, especially since you've got the cap space, and you do have some assets that you can deal. They've got all their picks other than their 7th round pick. I think that's a big advantage over a team like Colorado, who you're going to have to wait an extra year to get their 1st round pick. And oh, by the way, Colorado might win the cup anyway. If they don't win it this year, they might win it next year. Whereas Minnesota is probably more of a, I won't say a long shot, but if you've got your maybe your top 4 teams who are all right, this team could win, the chances of it not being one of these 3 teams that win it are small. I think you throw Florida, Tampa, Colorado, and maybe Carolina in that group of hey, here's 4 teams that one of those 4 should probably win the cup. And then the next group's probably Pittsburgh, Toronto, Calgary, Vegas, Minnesota is probably in that, and is in that second group. I guess Vegas, when everyone's healthy and Mark Stone comes off LTIR in the playoffs, hashtag $9.5 million over the cap this time. So, I guess Vegas is pretty darn good. They might be in that top group, but yeah, I don't think Minnesota. All that to be said, I don't think Minnesota is in the top tier. They're not the top 3-4 elite teams in the league, but they're the next one. They're that next tier in my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that said, there's at least a better chance that your pick is somewhere in the 20s rather than 32, which is, of course, if you can trade your player to a team and you're well, they're not going to win a cup, so that's fine. That's fine with us. That's what we want, is for them not to win a cup, so that we have a better pick. And then that's when they win the cup. Okay, are we good with Minnesota? We move on to
Love
the
it.
Blues? Okay. The St. Louis Blues. I mean, this team has been kind of, I'd say a little bit up and down throughout the year. Their road record, just 10-8-3. They haven't been great on the road. At home, they've been phenomenal, 18-6-2. Jordan Binnington continues to kind of struggle here as Ville Husso makes a case for himself that he should be the number one goaltender. And to me, that's the biggest story for the St. Louis Blues right now.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that. And as much as I'd like to say, go out and get an asset, right, get another goaltender. I mean, honestly, with Ville Husso, you've got, Lindgren playing good hockey. The 5 games he was up, he was putting up a .958 save percentage. So really, it's just you got to find a way. You got to get Binnington in those soft games like tonight against Montreal, right? I don't know if he's starting.
I think I saw Husso starting tonight, actually.
Okay. I was going to say, those are the games you have to get him in there to help try to build his confidence, because he's been letting in 6-7 goals like nobody's business every game. And so you have to find a way to get him back on board. Now, again, I'm not expecting him to be the starter for the rest of the year or even in the playoffs. Right now, in my opinion, it's Husso's net to lose. But, again, you really don't have space to go out and get a goaltender that really is that much better than Binnington, right? Outside of like a third string goaltender is really all the cap space you have room for. So unless you move out some big money or you convince a team to maybe, hell, if they really take, a crack at it and try to trade Binnington, right? I mean, he's obviously at his lowest value ever, but that would solve your cap space issues right there of trying to fit somebody in. But
yeah, I mean,
again, not going to happen.
I don't think that it's necessarily about trading Binnington. I mean, that's not going to happen right now. But
not going to happen, right?
And I mean, it's more the dilemma. It's this like Roberto Luongo, Corey Schneider issue in some respects. Although Corey Schneider was an RFA, but Luongo was locked up for a long time, and you had Corey Schneider who was outplaying Luongo, but you knew that Corey Schneider was probably going to be gone the following year. And so you're left with this like, well, this guy's going to be on the bench. Like, it's the same as Bobrovsky and Drieger, right? Like, well,
sure.
I mean, we know Drieger's going to be gone. He's probably going to Seattle, and lo and behold, he does. But he's playing better. We can't very well be playing Bobrovsky if we want to win, and so they don't. And it actually worked out great for Florida. I mean, Bobrovsky figured his life out, and now everything's good. But I think you got to ride the guy who's playing well, because it's not even like Binnington is, all right, he's 0.05 points behind, or like he's nowhere in the same universe as Ville Husso right now. I mean, we're a 185 939 save percentage through 17 games for Husso, and a 335 goals against with an 898 save percentage. I mean, he's 4.5% better from a save percentage perspective. I mean, they're just in a different universe, and that's an issue. They're still going back to Binnington. I know they want to make it work, and they need to make it work because they need to be able to rely on him for the next 6 years, 5 years after this.
He's the guy that won you the cup, right? So you want him to be the guy in the playoffs.
Yeah. And it's in there somewhere. It's just not happening right now.
Yep.
Outside of the goaltending position, is there anywhere that you think the Blues will add?
Yeah, I think obviously their forward group is phenomenal. I like everything about it when healthy. Their top 9 is, you've got David Perron, who's close to a point per game on that third line. Brendan Saad's looking good right now. So again, top to bottom on that forward group is good. I don't change a thing. But what I would like to look at if I'm St. Louis and maybe looking to add something, that's somebody to play alongside Colton Parayko on that left side, right? I mean, obviously Torrey Krug and Justin Falk have looked good together this year. But again, really they've been, mixing up partners with Parayko all year long. And I think you need to find, potentially somebody who can come in and fill in on that left slot. Now, again, does he have to have term? No, not necessarily. But, obviously, ideally, St. Louis would love to find somebody with term. But I think you could go out and cheaply acquire, not maybe cheaply, but without spending a ton, without having to give up a first-round pick, you could find a guy to slot in there. Like, for example, a Mark Giordano, right? A guy who's played big minutes before in big situations. You could probably snag him for less than a first.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I think
you don't
he'll
think
probably
so?
Go for less than a
One
first.
team is going to give up a first-round pick for Mark Giordano?
You know what? I think it's really hard unless, because I think teams like that are going to go after other guys like a Jonathan Kleinberg, right? A guy with, a little bit more to his game, a lot younger player right now. I think teams will be willing to spend the first on a guy like that versus a guy like Mark Giordano. And, he'll definitely get a second-round pick plus some. But again, the market could change, right? I could be completely wrong. Someone could go out and trade for a guy like Jacob Chychrun and spend 3 first-round picks and, 2 other pieces. And then, of course, Giordano's value goes up because of it. So,
yeah, and a lot of it could depend on whether or not the Ducks decide that they need to trade either Lindholm or Manson. That will throw a big wrench into the defensive game.
Yep, without a doubt. So maybe a Ben Sherratt, too. There's another guy, again. He might get
plays
close
the
to a
left
first-round
side.
pick.
He can actually play both.
Yeah, but he would be a great fit, I think, with Parayko.
Yeah, I mean, you need somebody who can play pretty big minutes to play with Colton Parayko. I mean, it's too bad Anaheim is so good, has been doing well because Hampus Lindholm. I feel like that guy is St. Louis Blues material. Like, I look at his game and I see somebody who I could see that guy playing on the Blues, the way that they play, the way that he plays. Yeah, I mean, the back end is definitely the spot for concern for the Blues because really, if somebody in that top 4 goes down, I mean, you're really hurting, and it's not guaranteed, but the chances of something happening are there, and that's what your whole team kind of rests on is all 4 of those guys staying healthy is what you need. And that's not easy on the back end. Defensemen go down on the regular, and especially the way that they play. There's not a whole lot other player. I mean, that you would want to slot with Parayko. That's the difficult thing is that it's not as if you're just going to go out and get a depth guy to play along Parayko.
Right.
You got to have somebody with pretty good talent. Probably like someone else who can also move the puck or is just incredibly responsible in the back end. If you're looking to bring in a left side defenseman, I mean, there are certainly defensemen out there, but whether or not you're looking at somebody and saying, yeah, let's go and bring in like Robert Hagg from the Buffalo Sabres. I mean, I don't think that's somebody you want playing alongside Parayko. You would want that for your bottom pairing, and that's where it becomes more difficult when you're trying to find someone a pairing as opposed to just adding depth, because you got to have somebody who certainly definitely plays the left side, and they have to be good enough to play 23-ish minutes a game. And there aren't very many of those guys on the block right now. Maybe only Giordano is the only one out there right now, and Sherratt. So
yeah, another name I'll throw out there too that, again, not having the best of seasons, but prior to this year was looking easily like a top 4 defenseman, on the regular, and that's Nick Leddy.
Yeah,
he could potentially slide in there, and I don't think he would cost as much as some of those other guys either. So that could be a name to look at. But, of course, money would have to go back the other way, and I don't think, again, a team like Detroit wants to take on a contract like, for example, Scandella's, who's going to probably most likely be a casualty of this situation, but will also get you maybe a higher draft pick in return because of it.
Yeah, one name that I wanted to throw out for the Blues and kind of the Predators. They're not. No one's talking about this name yet because they're technically still in the playoff hunt. But I think that the Winnipeg Jets are going to keep on falling, and by the time the trade deadline comes about, I think we're probably looking at once again Paul Stastny being dealt at the trade deadline. I believe that's happened at least. It's had to have happened at least Well, I guess it happened once. I feel like it's always been rumored, right? But I guess he was traded from St. Louis to Winnipeg in 17-18, and since then, he's played for the Golden Knights. He's also gone back to the Winnipeg Jets. He's had a pretty good season, and for St. Louis, I mean, to be able to add someone like Paul Stastny, who you're familiar with, he's familiar with your organization. It's within the division. I don't think Winnipeg would really care if they're going to miss the playoffs. He's reasonably affordable, and my guess is that he would go there. He doesn't have any kind of no move, but a guy who's 36 and has been around, you're gonna ask him what he thinks probably, and I would guess that he wouldn't mind going there.
Yeah, I think Minnesota would be another great spot for him as well. Who he could get top 6 minutes again playing down the middle. I mean, he's been playing on the wing most of the season now with Winnipeg, but not unfamiliar to the center role.
Yeah, and Winnipeg's kind of boring because even if they are bad, like him and Andrew Kopp are the only two guys who you're probably looking at and saying, okay, yeah, he could get dealt. Maybe Nathan Boulier, but that's inconsequential type of player. So they're kind of boring. Like they were one of the teams that I think a lot of people had in the playoffs or pretty darn close. They're not necessarily out of it, like I said, but they are a team where I think a lot of teams would like to have a couple guys on their team, but there's no one close to contracts ending, so that kind of makes them a little less exciting, unfortunately.
Sure.
Okay, well, let's go to the Nashville Predators, who have been maybe the biggest surprise of the year because they're not like Anaheim. They were doing real well. It looked like they were in the playoff position, but really they weren't because they so many games in hand for the teams behind them, and they just have not kept pace. Really, technically, they have lost 4 more games than they've won, so they haven't been great. LA is kind of in that same boat, but LA's got a couple of games in hand on the Ducks. Maybe one of those 2 teams make the playoffs. It's probably a toss-up, LA, Anaheim, Dallas. Likely one of those 3 teams will end up making the playoffs, but Nashville looks like they'll make it. I mean, barring a brutal collapse, which they have lost 3 in a row, but barring a brutal collapse, they should be able to sneak in here. Since this team is such a surprise, what do we expect here from the Predators? Because I don't think they think they're going to win the Cup. But do you owe it to these guys who have had such a good season to go out and bolster the lineup?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think, what you're concerned with, especially with a guy like Philip Forsberg, who is a UFA, and you could potentially lose him after this season for nothing because, again, I don't think they're going to trade him at the deadline because they're going to be in the playoff hunt, and I do think they will make the playoffs, but I think you have to make some sort of splashy move to say to a guy like Forsberg to say, hey, you know what? We're in this. We're going to, we really think we can contend. And I think we can contend for years to come, especially, you hope that, guys like Johansson, Duchesne, and Granlund can keep up this success they've had this year under Hines' system and maybe, adding a piece in the offseason because you do have a lot of cap space. You hope that maybe things can turn around and continue to have this success, especially with, teams like Colorado and St. Louis not looking like they're really going anywhere anytime soon. But, for me, I think if you want to make any kind of splash at all, you have to go out and get yourself a scoring winger, right? You have to get somebody who can score you some goals because really they've got a lot of grit. They've got a lot of toughness on the wing. They've got some good centers, but they really lack guys who can put the puck in the back of the net outside of, Forsberg, in my opinion, on the wing. And so to me, that's the one area I would like to see them make an improvement on.
Okay, here's my trade proposal. All right.
Give it to me.
San Jose Sharks and Tomas Hertl. Kind of after the acting general manager for the Sharks basically said, yeah, I mean, we want him to stay. He wants to stay. Tomas Hertl was like, I didn't say that. He can't, in maybe fewer words, but or in different words, but basically kind of said, there's no guarantee that I'm staying here. I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion. And I'm thinking, all right, San Jose, you're living the California life, and Nashville, they call it Little Hollywood, so it's got its California feel, its vibe, lots of good music. Tomas Hertl would fit beautifully with the Nashville Predators. Not only can they trade for him, but they would have the opportunity to sign him, and I think that he would be a wonderful addition. You re-sign Philip Forsberg, you sign Tomas Hertl next season. They've got the cap space to do both. I could see him being a fantastic fit, whether it's that second line center or he becomes their first line center. Really, this team, maybe they don't have a superstar at the center position, but going down the lineup, Ryan Johansson, Matt Duchene, Tomas Hertl, Michael Granlund, like these guys that can all play center. They all don't have to play center all the time, but they certainly have the ability to. For Tomas Hertl, I would expect that it would take a first-round pick plus some kind of like maybe a B level prospect.
I think it's going to take much more than that. I mean, you look at what Tyler Toffoli just got. He got 4 pieces, and if I'm picking between Hertl and Tyler Toffoli, I'm taking Tomas Hertl all day just because he can play at the center position. So I think it's at least you're going to have to give up this year's first round, at least a second round pick, and then probably 2 pieces, maybe a roster guy and maybe a B prospect, yes, but you could throw in an Eeli Tolvanen in that mix, maybe a Luke Kunin.
There's no way they're trading Luke Kunin right now.
I don't know. If you think you can re-sign Hertl and get him in there, I would say go for it, really. And then maybe, again, you could go a little bit further down the line and maybe throw in a Cody Glass there in that mix too, and trade him. But
Cody Glass was kind of a guy. I mean, he's ripping up the AHL right now. He's got 36 points in 41 games. He's playing well down there, and maybe he's somebody who could go to the Sharks and play well. I think that Tomas Hertl is a good fit. Yes, the Tyler Toffoli deal the Calgary Flames gave up a lot for Tyler Toffoli. And Tyler Toffoli, now, he's about as good of a goal scorer as Tomas Hertl, eh? So,
Toffoli plays a great two-way game, and another reason why Calgary wanted to give up so much is, he's got familiarity there with Suter in LA, and so there's just that, that chemistry that they already have. They know what kind of game, is expected out of him. So
sure, yeah, he's played for Daryl Sutter before, and
right.
Yeah, for him, they Tyler Pitlick, okay, roster player Tyler Pitlick, but come on, Tyler Pitlick's not really a roster, like he's a fourth line plug. He's got 2 points in 25 games, both assists. The prospect that they got, Emil Heineman, he was taken in the second round by the Florida Panthers in 2020. I guess I would say that's probably pretty similar to what it would take to get Tomas Hertl. So if you were to do a first, because they gave a first and a fifth with the 2 picks, I wouldn't think that a first and a second, you're going to give up much more than that.
I don't know. For a guy that can score goals and, again, if you think you can sign him in the offseason, why not, right? Because, again, you have to assume Nashville, they're probably going to face off against Colorado in the first round. And as much as I hate to say it, you need the firepower if you're going to withstand that juggernaut. And, if they want to have a chance at re-signing Philip Forsberg and not letting him go somewhere else, I say go all in right now because, again, it's going to be a mid to, 20s, pick, your first round pick anyways. And same with that second round. So I say why not, right? Because your chances of finding a quality player like Tomas Hertl with that type of pick anyways is going to be, rolling dice at that point. So,
yeah, and
I don't know.
Nashville's advantage is that they have a lot of cap space, especially in comparison to these top teams. Between Colorado, Florida, Toronto, St. Louis, Carolina, Pittsburgh. Like, I think there's like a total of like 300 and something thousand in terms of cap space. Like less than $400,000 in cap space for so many teams on here combined. I mean, there just isn't much in terms of playoff teams. Teams that are in the playoffs right now that have cap space. The LA Kings, that have more than we'll say more than 900,000 in cap space. The LA Kings, the Boston Bruins, Minnesota Wild, the New York Rangers, the Nashville Predators. That's it. Those are the only teams with more than 900,000 in cap space.
That's crazy.
and the next highest team is the Calgary Flames, and they have 174,000 in cap space. I guess Colorado has 282,000. So. It's not much. There's not much going there. So it's, I mean, that's where they have the advantage is that they can trade and not have to trade off their roster because they don't need to lose salary. Unless everyone just starts putting players on LTIR, that'll do it.
Yeah, and speaking of LTIR, so what I will say, another name you could throw out there for Nashville that I think would be a good fit, and because of this team's desperation with cap issues coming down the stretch here, especially if Mark Stone comes back, you could potentially pluck a Riley Smith or maybe a Jonathan Marchessault, one of those guys, Evgeny Dadonov maybe. You could get one of these guys for probably fairly cheaper than, definitely cheaper than a guy like Tyler Toffoli, but...
I'll say this, Justin. There's no way Mark Stone is coming back until the first game of the playoffs.
I agree with you. I do, but
absolutely no way. And they're not going to trade anyone off their roster. I don't think. I wouldn't think that they would.
Well, if Alec Martinez comes back, they're going to have to move some
no,
money.
they can still do it right now. Even with him, they've got $5 million, $5.1 million, and he's at what 5.25. So yeah, I mean they need 100,000 in cap space to bring him back, which you just send somebody down who you're not using, right? So they can bring him back up, no problem. That was the beauty of Mark Stone going on LTIR, was that it allows them to bring back Eichel and Martinez in one foul swoop.
Boy, I hope
it's
you're
happening,
right.
Dude. It is happening. That is exactly how it's happening.
Now, what I will say, the NHL though, they are being a lot more. I did hear today, Elliot Friedman came out and he was being asked about this, and he did say the NHL is doing their due diligence when it comes to this a lot more seriously now. They basically have already, I guess, last year when I would think it was Kucherov, who came back at game one. They said they basically had 3 different doctors checking up with him on the regular. The NHL is basically going to be checking up on Mark Stone. Yep. I would assume almost weekly, if not every few weeks, just to see where he's at. Because again, you want to make sure that, everything's on the up and up, and they're just not, it's one thing to give a guy a few extra games, but it's another to give a guy a few extra months, right?
Sure. Yeah. And I think what you'll see, because the amount of days that you have to be out if you go on LTIR is like 21 days or so, I think.
Yeah, 10 games or 24 days.
24 days. So they are already going, like, now he's on LTIR. Now, in 24 days, the league's doctors will check on him again. And my guess is it'll be on that, like, somewhat of that type of scale. Every 3 weeks or so, he'll have to go and prove that he's still hurt for another 3 weeks. Which, dude, with back issues, you can't tell a guy he's not having back issues.
Yeah, that one is tough. It's for him,
very
he's been
hard.
Having problems all year.
Right. It's not. Well, and here's my thing. It's not as if, like, Mark Stone being out and bringing Jack Eichel back in, it's not as if they're suddenly so much better because of this. I mean, yes, if when and if he comes back in the playoffs, they will be much better. But in the regular season, I'd say that it's a relative wash. I mean, Mark Stone was the top 10 Hart Trophy candidate last year. I mean, this is not a bum player being sat down for cap space. So, I mean, they're also losing out by not having him, right? So,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's one of the best two-way guys in the game. And, yeah, obviously he brings that defensiveness that, a guy like Eichel doesn't have. But Eichel will also bring that, basically game-breaker ability that Mark Stone doesn't have, right? I mean, not to say that Mark Stone can't drive a game or drive a line, but Eichel takes it to a whole nother level that I don't think we've ever seen from Mark Stone. But, again, we don't even know if a guy like Jack Eichel is going to be 100% at any point this year.
Yeah, we don't know how long it's going to take him to get back into this, into game shape. We'll say. I mean, you can look as you can look like a freaking king in practice. What happens in a game, and guys know that you're. I mean, I don't think that people are like, oh, he's got a disc replacement. Let's target the disc. But they're certainly not going to hold back, laying the body on him. So we'll see about that. But I do think, back to the Nashville Predators, Nashville, to me, they shouldn't. I don't know that I would go. I'd be hesitant to trade my first round pick, but if they do, Tomas Hertl should be the only player that they trade their first round pick for. He would be a wonderful fit there, and the only way you do it is if you know that he's going to re-sign there. Because Nashville, I mean, yes, this season has gone really well, but you know what? Last season went really horribly, and it's not as if the makeup of this team is that different from last year. Sure.
Now, here's another name that obviously I think is going to cost you, much more than a first-round pick, but Frank Cervelli on Daily Faceoff just came out with an article today, and he just added Brock Besser to his trade board at number 6. And so apparently the trade chatter around the newly assembled regime, basically, because he's due a large qualifying offer this summer, he's almost become a prime candidate to go on the move. I mean, there's been talks of JT Miller, but I wouldn't trade JT Miller from Vancouver. I would want to keep him around, especially because he's already under contract at such a
you can always trade him next year at the deadline.
Right, but Brock Besser, I mean, is he a guy that maybe if you're in Nashville, you look and say, you know what, let's make a play on this guy if he's available. If Vancouver's far and out of it, in a few weeks, do you maybe, again, I would completely throw my first round pick draft, at
sure,
him. But
yes, somebody who you have control of for multiple years after this. Yep. Yeah, that would be an interesting acquisition for Nashville. I mean, it's been a minute since they've had a guy like Brock Besser.
Right. Maybe he doesn't fit that Nashville mold, specifically, but I think you could find a way to get him involved and have him scoring some goals. Right, exactly. Bring a little something different to the table.
Yeah. I mean, at Vancouver, and we'll hit Vancouver. We'll do lots of Pacific. Maybe we'll just do the Pacific Division, some teams in there for next show. But Vancouver, of course, I mean, they're in the some kind of mode, a retool, a revamping mode. I don't know if we're we'd go as far to say that they're going to try and rebuild. I think it'll be a retool, just kind of trying to figure out what works here. But I would say that almost everyone is on the table there because of that. Like, none of these players were drafted by this current regime. So that automatically makes it so that, maybe outside of Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson, I'd say everybody's on the table. I mean, maybe even Elias Pettersson. I don't know. He hasn't had a great year. And I would think it would be really difficult. It would cost a fortune. And that's not going to happen at the deadline, even if it did. But, yeah, I mean, I think everybody's probably on the table here.
Yeah, I might call Demko safe, but outside of that,
sure.
I'm almost with you on that one.
Yeah, it's funny. We went through this stage of like, you can get a goalie anywhere. To now, people are like, oh my gosh, you can't find a good goalie anywhere on the free agent market.
Edmonton's kicking themselves after last year.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the team, it's one thing, like there's some teams who have two really good goalies, and there's some teams that cannot find, like, no matter who they sign, no matter how good a season they had in the past, they just can't seem to find a goalie, or that goalie gets hurt all the time, i.e. Mike Smith. That guy is like the vase that you've broken 3 times and hot glued back together, and all it takes is somebody to burp loud and the thing cracks open again. I hope he is the most unique goaltender left in the NHL, in my opinion. I mean, there's no one else like Mike Smith in the National Hockey League, and probably the last of like the old guard in terms of goalies that are fantastic at playing the puck and just play a weird style. Like, goalies are becoming much more mainstream. Like, most of them are pretty similar. They're kind of cut from the same cloth. Mike Smith's on his own. I hope that he can stay healthy and the Oilers can figure it out, because they're back in the playoff in a playoff position. Ironically, for as bad as they were, now at this point, a 7-2 record. They've won 3 in a row under their new head coach, Jay Woodcroft, and Stuart Skinner looks really good. But now, with 2 games in hand on Vegas, Edmonton goes out and wins these 2 games. They're ahead of Vegas. All the concern, they weren't that far back, and it's amazing how quickly in 1 week all of a sudden you go, oh, they're like the same as Vegas.
Yeah, here's the other funny part of that too, right? So Dave Tippett was their head coach prior, right? For those who don't know, he was considered probably one of the best defensive coaches in the game, but yet in 3 games since they brought in Jay Woodcroft, they've only allowed 3 goals.
Yeah. And
what the frick?
He could never figure it out. It was the weirdest thing.
Right.
Oh, good times. Well, we are off next week because I am going to Florida.
Lucky man.
Yeah. I'm going to escape the snow. I have to go plow right now so that I can get out of my driveway tomorrow. But other than that will hopefully be my biggest hurdle. Besides, hauling an 18-month-old down from Michigan to Florida, 19 hour drive. Yeah, that'll be fun. It's funny. 2 different people, exact same phrasing. They were like, hopefully you can get to the airport with all the snow. I'm like, no, it was my dad and a guy that we hang out with all the time, and he knew that we were driving. And he's like, dude, both of them, we're driving, not flying. Oh, you are? Oh, good luck. Both of them, same exact thing. You're driving down there with an 18-month-old? Yes, we have toys. I don't know. We have an iPad. That's supposed to solve everything, right? That's what they say.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, you can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Thanks for listening. Hit that subscribe button, and we will talk to you in 10 to 12 days, I'd say. But we'll be taking next week off. We'll see you in March.